People don't realize how thin we were spread down there and how close we come to lose in that war. I hope that my country can be as proud of me as I am proud of my country.
Francis Sherman Currey was the scariest soldier of WW2 for good reason. He single-handedly disabled 3 German tanks during one of the war's most critical battles. During the frigid winter of 1944, as German forces launched their desperate offensive in Belgium, the 17-year-old soldier demonstrated extraordinary courage that would earn him America's highest military honor. Now, his story isn't all about his heroic deeds. There's a big question. Why? Why was he so fearless? In this video, I'm going to be revealing everything in details. So don't you dare blink and keep watching till the very end. Francis Sherman Currey was the scariest soldier of WW2, and here's why. They said historians often struggled to put into words just how extraordinary Francis Currey's actions in Malmedy really were. But one thing they all agreed on was that his bravery left a mark the German forces would never forget. They spoke about how his behavior on the battlefield didn't just bend the rules of conventional warfare, it shattered them. While bullets tore through the air and explosions rattled the ground, Currey moved forward again and again, straight toward enemy positions as if fear simply didn't exist for him. At one point, he advanced alone, closing the distance to just 50 yards from where the Germans were entrenched. And he didn't crouch low or hide behind cover. No, he once stood tall, completely exposed, firing a bazooka at a house wall, just so he could get a cleaner shot. Witnesses said it was as if he wanted the enemy to see him, as though he knew the sight of a lone, unshaken soldier would rattle their confidence far more than the weapon in his hands. The most jaw-dropping moment, they recalled, was when he climbed onto a half-track in plain view of German troops and let loose with a machine gun, raining fire down on their position as if nothing could touch him. Could anyone watch something like that and not feel a shiver down their spine? What makes a soldier so feared that even the enemy tells stories about him? Francis Sherman Currey didn't just survive World War II, he dominated it in ways that sound almost unreal. But was it pure skill, raw courage, or something else entirely? Stay with us, because by the end, you'll understand why Currey became a legend on the battlefield. It wasn't just about raw courage. It was the way he handled weapons like an artist, working with his tools. People said what stood out most was his mastery over so many different kinds of firepower in such a short span of time. Within just a few hours, he was seen using a Browning automatic rifle, a bazooka, anti-tank grenades, and multiple machine guns, switching between them with the ease of someone who knew every quirk, strength, and weakness of each weapon. He even used anti-tank grenades, knowing full well they wouldn't destroy the massive enemy armor. But he understood they'd make enough noise and smoke to scare and confuse the crews inside. That kind of quick thinking made him unpredictable. And unpredictability on the battlefield was deadly. Wasn't it obvious that a man like this was more dangerous than an entire squad? The Germans, it turned out, felt the weight of his presence more than anyone. Currey's nonstop attacks gave them the impression they were facing a much larger force. Tank crews, shaken by the relentless assault, actually abandoned their vehicles, leaving behind the very machines that were supposed to secure their victory. His actions didn't just slow down the enemy. They brought an entire SS offensive to a grinding halt. Normally, stopping something like that would require a coordinated team with heavy support, but Currey did it alone. The cost to the Germans was huge, multiple tanks disabled, countless casualties, and, perhaps most importantly, their momentum broken. And then came the moment that cemented his place in history. After the war, when Currey met General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, the Supreme Allied commander reportedly told him that his actions in Malmedy had single-handedly shortened the war by 6 weeks or more. Think about that. 6 weeks. 6 weeks fewer of bloodshed, destruction, and loss. All because one young soldier refused to back down when the world around him was falling apart. Eisenhower's words weren't just praise. They were an acknowledgement that sometimes a single man's courage could change the course of history. And wasn't that the kind of story that made people believe in heroes? Military enlistment. Francis Sherman Currey's story began in the quiet town of Loch Sheldrake, New York, where he was born on June 29, 1925. His childhood was not the kind that offered long summers of carefree play or the comfort of a close-knit family. Life had other plans. When he was only 5 years old, tragedy struck for the first time with the death of his father. For most children, that kind of loss leaves a deep scar, but Currey would soon find himself enduring even more. 7 years later, in 1937, his mother passed away, leaving him completely orphaned at just 12 years old. What was a boy supposed to do when the very foundation of his world disappeared twice before he even reached his teenage years? The answer for Currey was simple but far from easy. He entered the New York State foster care system. He was placed with a foster family in nearby Hurleyville, where his new life came with both shelter and hard work. The arrangement provided room and board on a farm, and though it wasn't the warm home he had once known, it offered something else: discipline, self-reliance, and an understanding of work that was both physical and relentless. Farm life demanded early mornings, long hours, and the ability to solve problems with whatever tools were at hand. It also taught him hunting and the handling of light weapons, lessons that seemed ordinary at the time, but would one day prove critical in ways no one could have predicted. Instead of allowing his circumstances to break him, Currey seemed to grow stronger, developing a quiet resilience that set him apart from other boys his age. By the time he reached 17, the world was deep in the throes of World War II, and Currey made a choice that would change everything. In June 1943, just a week after graduating from Hurleyville High School, he enlisted in the United States Army. He was tall for his age, standing 6 feet, but he was lean, weighing only 130 pounds, a figure that gave no hint of the soldier he was about to become. Why enlist so young? Well, the timing wasn't accidental. The Army had recently introduced the Army Specialized Training Program, ASTP, a selective program that admitted students based on exam results. Currey had passed the exam, and the program came with a major benefit. Recruits could choose their assignments instead of being thrown into the draft without control. But there was a catch. They had to join before their 18th birthday. And so, just shy of that milestone, Currey made his move. He was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, where he completed basic training as part of the ASTP. This wasn't a typical boot camp. Its goal was to see if civilians could go straight into officer training without the usual progression through the ranks. Remarkably, Currey completed officer candidate school at just 18 years old, an achievement that spoke volumes about his intelligence and determination. Yet, despite his success, his military superiors decided he was too immature for a commission. Still, Currey thrived in training. He later recalled that, at his age, he could absorb all that training like a sponge. And it was true. His background in hunting and weapon handling meant he quickly mastered almost every firearm he touched. He even took part in the Louisiana Maneuvers, one of the last massive war games before deployment overseas, an experience that sharpened his skills and prepared him for the chaos of real battle. And it was that same resolve that would carry him straight into one of the most harrowing chapters of his life, the long and deadly road to Malmedy. Stick with this story until the very end, because what he faced there is the kind of truth that stays with you forever. The road to Malmedy. After finishing his training back in the States, Francis Sherman Currey's journey took him across the Atlantic and straight into the heart of Europe, where war was no longer just a distant headline, but a brutal reality that would test him in ways he could never have imagined. He landed in Europe in July 1944, just weeks after the D-Day invasion had changed the course of the war. Omaha Beach, the same stretch of sand that had been soaked in blood and chaos only days earlier, was now in Allied hands. But the air still carried the weight of what had happened there. Curry's arrival had been delayed by an order from President Franklin Roosevelt himself, one that kept soldiers under 19 away from combat zones. He had turned 19 on June 29th, and with that milestone, he was finally allowed to join the fight, just in time for one of the most critical chapters of the war. After arriving in England with a replacement unit, Curry eventually made his way across the Channel, passing through Omaha Beach and into the European mainland. For a while, he was held at a replacement depot, watching as Allied forces pushed the Germans back through France and into Belgium. This waiting period gave him time to think, to brace himself for the kind of combat that could end a man's life in seconds. In September 1944, his orders came through. He was to join the 3rd Platoon, K Company, 120th Infantry Regiment, part of the 30th Infantry Division. His first real taste of war came in Kerkrade, Holland, and it was a baptism by fire. There was no easing into it. September and October were spent fighting through the Siegfried Line, a seemingly endless chain of German defenses that stretched across villages, forests, and open fields. The 30th Division joined the attack on Aachen from the north, hammering at one of Germany's most heavily defended cities. By October 18th, Curry was in Herzogenrath, Germany, pushing toward Belgium with his unit, each day bringing new firefights and new losses. But the enemy wasn't the only threat. Winter came early and came hard, and Curry, like thousands of other soldiers, didn't have the gear to face it. No heavy coats, no proper boots, nothing to keep out the biting cold that sank into bones and stayed there. The winter of 1944 was one of the coldest in memory, and Hitler used it to his advantage, launching the Ardennes Côte offensive when Allied troops were at their most vulnerable. Many soldiers had believed the war would end by Christmas, so winter clothing hadn't been the top priority. Supply lines focused on getting ammunition and reinforcements to the front, not parkas or gloves. And when the German attack came, it caught everyone off guard. Soldiers made do with whatever they could find: mattress covers, parachute silk, scraps of white cloth from local villagers to stay warm and hidden in the snow. Those lucky enough to get proper winter camouflage often got it from British troops. The conditions were merciless. Rifles jammed from the cold, engines froze solid, tanks refused to move. Wounded men died simply because the cold killed them before help could arrive. Frostbite and trenchfoot claimed thousands, leaving them maimed long after the fighting stopped. And it was in this frozen hell, with blizzards cutting visibility to nothing and the enemy pressing harder than ever, that Curry would face the moment that would define his name in military history. A moment when courage wasn't just a word, but the only thing standing between survival and death. The battle that defined him. December 21st, 1944. In the quiet, freezing darkness before dawn in Malmedy, on December 21st, 1944, Francis Curry's world would change in ways he could never have imagined. At around 4 a.m., that stillness shattered. First with the deep, thunderous roar of distant artillery, and then with the sickening realization that the enemy was making their move. People often wonder what courage really looks like in the face of death. Well, for Curry, it began with that deafening German barrage ripping through the cold morning air, marking the start of a brutal offensive aimed directly at the position he was guarding. He was with the 3rd Platoon, serving as an automatic rifleman, keeping watch over a crucial bridge crossing. As the shells exploded and the air turned to smoke and haze, he saw the unthinkable unfold. German forces had just overrun nearby American anti-tank guns and tank destroyers, leaving them badly exposed. Then, through the shifting gray fog of war, he caught sight of a German tank commander, coolly surveying the area from his turret, as if victory was already his. That was all Curry needed to see. Without hesitation, he leveled his Browning automatic rifle, squeezed the trigger, and struck the officer before the man could even react. It was the first in a string of split-second decisions that would shape the day and save countless lives. But battles don't pause for moments of triumph. As the first tank halted, the situation only grew more desperate. Curry and his squad were forced to fall back into an abandoned factory, a building that had once served as an American military hospital. Inside, in the dim light, Curry spotted a bazooka, his best hope against the armored monsters rumbling toward them. The problem? No rockets. Most people might have cursed their luck and stayed hidden, but Curry wasn't wired that way. He made a choice most would call insane. He darted across the open street, fully exposed, with enemy fire snapping past him, and made it to a damaged half-track. There, he found the rockets he needed. Then, just as quickly, he ran back. Moments later, alongside another soldier, he aimed at a German tank creeping forward. Their shot was perfect, hitting exactly where the turret met the chassis. In an instant, the tank shuddered, stopped, and became nothing more than a smoking hulk. But it didn't end there. Before they could catch their breath, 3 more German tanks rolled toward the bridge. It was enough to make any man's stomach drop. But Curry wasn't finished yet. Searching frantically, he found a stash of anti-tank grenades in a nearby vehicle. They weren't the most powerful weapons, hardly ideal against the thick armor, but they were all he had. So he used them one after another, hurling them with relentless determination. The explosions, combined with his precision and sheer persistence, convinced the German crews that they were facing a much larger assault. One by one, the crews abandoned their tanks, scrambling for cover in a stone house nearby. Imagine that. 3 tanks neutralized not just by firepower, but by one man's nerve and refusal to quit. In the chaos that followed, Curry's eyes caught sight of a nightmare. 5 American soldiers trapped between his position and the enemy, pinned down under heavy fire. 2 of them were wounded, and their chances of survival were shrinking by the second. This is where many would have stayed down, telling themselves there was nothing they could do without getting killed. But Curry didn't think that way. He climbed onto a half-track, making himself a prime target for every German rifle in the area, and swung a machine gun toward the enemy-held house. Bullets flew, glass shattered, and the sheer volume of his fire forced the Germans to keep their heads down. Then, when another machine gun crew was cut down, he took their place, spraying fire to cover the trapped men as they crawled and scrambled their way to safety. Because of him, all 5 made it out, alive. By now, the tide of the fight was turning. Without their tanks, and with their infantry suffering heavy losses, the Germans' momentum broke. Their advance stalled, and the threat of the American line being flanked faded away. It's one thing to fight bravely, it's another to almost single-handedly halt an enemy assault through sheer grit, quick thinking, and a mastery of every weapon within reach. Curry had done both. His actions that day destroyed enemy equipment, saved American lives, and kept his battalion's position from collapsing. And still, he wasn't done. As night fell and the bitter cold closed in again, the battlefield lay strewn with wounded men. Curry went back into the abandoned hospital and found a jeep fitted with stretcher mounts. While others were catching their breath or tending to their own injuries, he was loading the wounded and ferrying them to safety, one trip after another, until they were all evacuated. By the end of that day, one of the longest, bloodiest, and most exhausting days of his life, Francis Curry had written his name into history, though he didn't know it yet. His courage and actions would soon earn him America's highest military honor, the Medal of Honor. But in that moment, medals didn't matter. What mattered was that he had done what needed to be done, no matter the risk. And isn't that the true measure of a hero? Not someone who plans to be brave, but someone who simply refuses to be anything else when the moment comes. just an unbreakable refusal to be anything less than the person the situation demanded. And yet, as life has a way of reminding us, moments like that don't end when the smoke clears. Which brings us to what happened next. The recognition he received, the way his life changed after the war, and the unexpected truths he carried with him long after the battlefield faded. Stay with me, because this part of the story will make you see him in an entirely different light. Recognition and life. After the war, Francis Sherman Currey's life, after returning from the European theater of World War II, was shaped forever by the extraordinary heroism he had shown in battle. People who knew him often said that even though he came home as a decorated war hero, he carried himself with the same quiet humility he'd always had. His bravery had earned him a place in history, but he never wore that fame like a crown. Instead, he seemed to treat it as a solemn reminder of the sacrifices made, not just by him, but by countless others who never made it back. It's interesting, isn't it, how some of the bravest people are also the least boastful? When Currey returned, the recognition came quickly, and it would follow him for the rest of his long life, no matter how much he tried to keep a low profile. One of the most remarkable moments in his post-war story came on July 27, 1945. It was near Reims, France, and the day had a sense of ceremony that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the months before. Major General Leland Hobbs, commander of the 30th Infantry Division, stood before Currey to present him with the Medal of Honor. For any soldier, this is the highest award the United States can give, a symbol of valor that goes far beyond just doing one's duty. Can you imagine the weight of that moment? To stand there, knowing that what you had done had not only saved lives, but had also caught the attention of the highest ranks of command? It wasn't just a medal, it was a moment that solidified his place in military history. Officially, the award date would be recorded as August 17, 1945. But the story behind it was timeless. General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself reportedly said that Currey's actions had single-handedly shortened the war by 6 weeks or more. Now, whether you take that as exact calculation or as a statement meant to capture the magnitude of his courage, it's hard not to be struck by the sheer impact of such words. 6 weeks might not sound like much, but in war, it can mean thousands of lives saved and entire battles avoided. And while the Medal of Honor was the crown jewel among his accolades, it was far from the only recognition he received. In fact, Currey's uniform bore evidence of a soldier who had faced danger head-on time and time again. Alongside the Medal of Honor, there was the Silver Star, a decoration for gallantry in action. There was the Bronze Star, another testament to his bravery and leadership under fire. Then there were the 3 Purple Hearts, each one representing a moment when he was wounded in combat. 3 different times he had been close enough to danger to bleed for his country. That alone speaks volumes, doesn't it? It tells a story not just of one heroic day, but of repeated acts of service and sacrifice. His recognition wasn't limited to American honors either. The Belgian Order of Leopold, one of Belgium's highest honors, was awarded to him as a mark of gratitude from a nation he had helped to liberate. The Combat Infantry Badge testified to his role in frontline combat, where the dangers were constant and personal. And then there were the campaign medals, tangible reminders of the different battles and operations he had been part of. Each medal wasn't just metal and ribbon, it was a chapter of history he had lived through. Currey's legacy, though, had a way of crossing into unexpected territory. In 1998, more than 50 years after the war, he received a distinction no soldier before him had ever experienced. He became the first Medal of Honor recipient to be modeled as a G.I. Joe action figure. Think about that for a moment. Here was a man who had fought in real battles, whose courage had been tested in life and death situations, now being represented as a figure in a toy line known for its fictional heroes. Some might have found it odd, but Currey saw it as an opportunity to inspire younger generations. After all, how many kids would look at that toy, read his story, and realize that real heroes don't always wear capes? They wear uniforms and carry out their duty even when it costs them everything. People often wondered how Currey felt about all this recognition. Did it ever feel like too much? After all, not every veteran is comfortable being in the spotlight. From those who knew him, it seemed he never let the fame change him. The awards were kept, yes, but they were more like reminders than trophies. Reminders of the men he had served with, the ones who hadn't come home, and the price of freedom that people sometimes forget about in peacetime. He lived quietly, without seeking attention, and yet his story had a way of drawing people in. Perhaps that's because real humility is magnetic. It makes people want to listen more closely. His life after the war wasn't without its challenges, of course. Like many veterans, he carried the memories of combat with him, memories that could be as heavy as they were honorable. But Currey seemed to find ways to channel his experiences into a life of service and community. He attended events, spoke to people, especially young ones, about the realities of war, not in a way that glorified it, but in a way that made them understand the human cost. How many people can say they've left that kind of mark, both on the battlefield and in everyday life? Looking back on his story, one can't help but think that Currey's life was a bridge between two worlds: the chaotic, brutal world of war and the quieter, slower world that follows. In both, he was the same man, steady, unassuming, and deeply aware of the responsibility that came with the honors he had earned. Every medal, every handshake from a general or a president, every headline that mentioned his name, all pointed back to a single truth: that in one of history's darkest times, he had stood firm and made a difference. And isn't that the kind of legacy we all wish we could leave behind? A legacy not built on titles or wealth, but on the knowledge that when the moment came, we did the right thing, no matter the cost. Post-war career at Veterans Affairs. From 1950 all the way to his retirement in 1980, Currey spent his days working as a counselor at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Albany. It wasn't just a job to him, it became his life's work. Over those 30 years, he slowly but surely worked his way up to a supervisory position, earning the trust and respect of those around him. People often said he had a quiet but firm way of getting things done. And when it came to doing the right thing, he didn't shy away, even if it meant stepping on a few toes. That was why he played such a key role in uncovering corruption within the organization, something most people might have been too afraid or too tired to touch. And really, isn't that what set him apart? After retiring, he didn't simply fade into a quiet, comfortable life. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and started a landscaping business, pouring the same work ethic into the soil as he once had into his counseling. Later, he found himself booking conventions in South Carolina, a job that kept him busy until 2002. Yet, despite having fame from his military service, Currey never let it change who he was. He stayed rooted in his community, the kind of man you'd still see at the local diner or helping a neighbor fix a broken fence. He gave his time freely, volunteering with the South Bethlehem Ambulance Service, coaching Little League teams, and lending his voice and energy to various local committees. People said you could always count on him to show up when needed, no matter how small the task. His life was proof that true greatness doesn't come from medals or headlines, but from showing up for people day after day. On October 8, 2019, in Selkirk, New York, Currey passed away, leaving behind not just the memory of a decorated soldier, but the legacy of a man who never stopped serving others. And perhaps, isn't that the greatest honor of all? With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.